When Richard Callahan took his last breath in a private hospital room in Boston, his 3 children were already fighting over his watch. They didn't know that in exactly 6 days, a lawyer would open an envelope that would strip them of everything. $68 million, a mansion, 2 companies, and a name they thought belonged to them. And it would all go to a woman none of them had ever met. A stranger, a woman who worked at a gas station 40 minutes outside the city. By the end of this story, you'll understand why a dying man chose a complete stranger over his own blood. And the reason will break your heart before it puts it back together. Stay till the end because the final twist is something almost nobody sees coming. On the surface, the Callahans looked like the family everyone envied. Richard Callahan built Callahan Freight Logistics from a single truck in 1987 into a company worth over $90 million. He had the kind of success people write books about. Self-made, disciplined, ruthless in business, generous in public. He had 3 children. Marcus, the eldest at 41, ran the company's operations division. He wore his father's name like armor, dropping it in every meeting, every negotiation, every argument with a vendor who didn't want to lower their price. Diane, 38, was the responsible one. She managed the family's real estate holdings and had spent the last decade positioning herself as the child who understood their father best. And then there was Tyler, 33, the youngest, who had drifted between failed business ventures, 3 different addresses, and a growing pile of debts that his father had quietly paid off more times than anyone in the family liked to admit. For years, the 3 of them had one thing in common. They were waiting. Waiting for their father to slow down. Waiting for him to finally hand over the company. Waiting, if they were honest with themselves, for him to die. Not because they hated him, because they had built their entire adult lives around what would happen after. Marcus had already picked out the office he'd take over as CEO. Diane had already spoken to a decorator about renovating the family estate. Tyler had already promised a business partner a 6-figure investment, money he didn't have yet, but fully expected to. Richard, meanwhile, spent his final 2 years quietly, almost invisibly. He stopped attending galas. He sold 2 of his 4 cars. He started taking long drives alone on weekends, telling no one where he went. His children assumed it was grief. Their mother had passed 4 years earlier, or simply old age catching up to him. They were wrong. Richard Callahan wasn't slowing down because he was tired. He was preparing. Richard passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, quietly, in his sleep. The funeral was large, elegant, and, as Diane later admitted to a friend, exactly the kind of send-off he would have wanted. 6 days later, the family gathered in the office of Harold Whitman, the Callahan family's attorney for nearly 30 years. Marcus arrived in a tailored suit. Diane brought a leather folder she didn't need. Tyler showed up 15 minutes late, sunglasses still on. They expected a formality, a confirmation of what they already believed was theirs. Harold Whitman cleared his throat and began reading. The first few minutes were unremarkable, personal items. A few charitable donations Richard had made privately for years, which surprised no one who mattered, because no one in the room had known about them at all. Then Harold reached the central clause of the will and the room went still. The remainder of my estate, including all shares of Callahan Freight Logistics, the property located at 14 Ashford Lane, all investment accounts and all remaining assets, is to be transferred in full to Ms. Elena Marsh. Silence. Marcus was the first to speak. Who? Harold repeated the name calmly. Elena Marsh. That's not... Diane's voice cracked slightly. That's not a family name. Who is she? Harold folded his hands. Mr. Callahan asked me not to answer that question directly. He left something else for you to find that answer yourselves. He slid 3 sealed envelopes across the table. One for Marcus, one for Diane, one for Tyler. He wanted you to read these before you did anything else, Harold said. Before you called your lawyers. Before you said a single word to the press. He was very specific about that. Tyler tore his open immediately. Marcus held his unopened, staring at it like it might detonate. Diane's hands trembled as she broke the seal. Each letter began the same way. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And you already know what I've done. I need you to understand why. Not to justify it to you, but because you deserve the truth, even the part of it that will hurt. Richard's letter continued, laying out a story none of his children had ever heard. 34 years earlier, before Callahan Freight Logistics existed, before the mansion, before any of it, Richard Callahan was a 26-year-old truck driver drowning in debt. driving 18-hour shifts to keep his young family afloat. One night on a stretch of icy highway outside Albany, his truck jackknifed in a snowstorm. He was pinned, bleeding, certain he was going to die in the wreckage. A woman driving home from her night shift saw the accident and stopped. She wasn't trained in anything. She had no equipment. She simply refused to leave. She pulled him from the cab seconds before the fuel line ignited, dragged him 50 feet through the snow, and kept him conscious and talking until paramedics arrived 25 minutes later. Her name was Grace Marsh. Richard never forgot her. He tried to find her in the years after to thank her properly, to repay her somehow. But she had moved, and in the era before easy searches and social media, the trail went cold. His company, he built his fortune. And somewhere underneath all of it, he carried a debt he was never able to repay. 2 years before he died, working through some old paperwork from the accident, Richard found her name again. He hired someone to track her down. Grace Marsh had passed away 9 years earlier, but she had a daughter, Elena Marsh, 31 years old, working double shifts at a gas station outside the city, raising a 5-year-old son alone after her husband left, drowning in medical debt from her mother's final illness. Elena had no idea her mother had ever saved anyone's life. Grace Marsh had never told her own family. To her, it was simply the right thing to do on an ordinary night, not a story worth repeating. Richard began visiting Elena quietly, introducing himself only as an old friend of your mother's, never explaining the full truth. He watched her work double shifts with a sick child on her hip. He watched her turn down a payday loan because the interest rate felt like a trap. He watched her give her last $20 to a stranger in the parking lot who needed gas to get to a hospital. He saw in her the same thing that had knelt beside him in the snow 34 years earlier. I built an empire because a stranger gave me a second chance at life, his letter read. I am giving my empire to her daughter because I want that same second chance passed forward, not backward, into the hands of children who are waiting for money to arrive, but forward, into the hands of someone who has never once waited for anything to be handed to her. Marcus was the first to break the silence in Whitman's office, his letter crumpled in his fist. This is insane. He's giving away $68 million because some woman helped him 30 years ago. We're his children. You're his children, Harold said carefully, who he loved. That letter doesn't change that. He wanted me to remind you of something specific, actually. Harold opened his own folder. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, "Being loved and being owed are two different things. I love my children unconditionally. I do not owe them my company." Diane sat frozen, rereading her letter for the third time. Unlike her brothers, she wasn't thinking about the money first. She was thinking about her father, alone on those weekend drives no one questioned. Visiting a woman he never mentioned. Carrying a debt for 3 decades that none of his own children ever knew existed. "He never told us," she said quietly. 34 years and he never told a single one of us this story. "He tried once," Harold said. "At your mother's funeral, actually. He started to. Then he stopped himself. He told me afterward he didn't think any of you were ready to hear it." Tyler, who had said almost nothing, finally spoke. His voice was smaller than his siblings had heard in years. "Ready to hear what? That we didn't deserve it?" "No," Harold said. "Ready to hear that someone else did." Within 48 hours, Marcus had already contacted a contest the will attorney. Diane hadn't decided what she wanted to do. Tyler, oddly, had gone quiet altogether. No calls, no lawyers, nothing. The story inevitably leaked. A local reporter got hold of the will's contents, and within a week, trucking tycoon leaves fortune to stranger was picked up by outlets across the country. Comment sections filled with outrage on behalf of the children. Sympathy for a woman who had no idea any of this was coming, and no shortage of people calling the whole thing a hoax. Elena Marsh, meanwhile, had received a phone call from Harold Whitman that she initially assumed was a scam. She almost hung up twice. When Elena finally sat across from Harold in his office, she looked less like an heiress and more like someone bracing for bad news. She still had her gas station name tag clipped to her jacket. She'd come straight from a shift. "I don't understand," she said after Harold explained everything for the second time. "I met him maybe 8 times. He said he knew my mom from years ago. He never said..." She stopped. "He never said any of this." Harold slid a photograph across the table. It was old, faded at the edges. A young Richard Callahan, bandaged and bruised, sitting on the back of an ambulance, gripping the hand of a woman in a soaked winter coat. Elena stared at it for a long moment. "That's her jacket," she whispered. "I still have that jacket." "Your mother saved his life," Harold said gently. "He spent 30 years trying to find her to say thank you. When he couldn't, he decided to say it to you instead." Elena put her face in her hands. Not from joy, from the strange, disorienting grief of learning something enormous and beautiful about a parent who was no longer alive to explain it. "I can't take this," she said finally. "His kids, they're going to hate me. They should hate me. I didn't do anything to deserve—" "He didn't leave it to you because you earned it," Harold said. "He left it to you because your mother never expected anything in return for saving his life, and he wanted to make sure that kind of person was taken care of, at least once, by someone who could actually do it." Elena didn't sign anything that day. She asked for time. She told Harold she needed to think, not about the money, but about whether she even had the right to accept it. 3 weeks later, something happened that no one, not Harold, not the lawyers, not the tabloids, saw coming. Elena requested a meeting with all 3 Callahan children. Together. Marcus almost didn't go. Diane convinced him. Tyler, still unusually silent, agreed without argument. They met in a small conference room, tension thick enough to taste. Elena walked in wearing the same jacket from the old photograph. Grace's jacket, kept all these years. "I'm not here to fight you for anything," she said before anyone else could speak. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't even know your father." Marcus crossed his arms. "Then why are you here?" "Because I read the letters your father left too," Elena said. "He gave me a copy, and I think he wanted the 4 of us to actually meet each other before any of us decided anything permanent." She placed a folder on the table. "I've had a lawyer draw up something. I'm not taking the entire estate. I never wanted the company. I don't know how to run a logistics empire, and honestly, the money terrifies me more than it excites me. I'm keeping enough to pay off my mother's medical debt and give my son a stable life. That's it. That's all I actually need." She slid the folder toward Marcus, Diane, and Tyler. "The rest, the company, the majority of the estate, I want split between the 3 of you. Not because I feel guilty, because I think that's what he actually wanted underneath all of it. He didn't want to punish you. He wanted to wake you up." The room was silent for a long moment. Diane was the one who finally reached for the folder. Her hands were shaking. "Why would you do this? You could have just taken it. No one would have blamed you." Elena looked down at the old jacket she was wearing. "Because my mother didn't stop on that highway because she wanted something back. She stopped because it was the right thing to do. I think if I took every dollar out of guilt or fear of what people would say about me, I'd be the opposite of the woman your father spent 30 years trying to thank." The company was restructured within the year. Marcus finally became CEO, not handed the position but earning the board's confidence for the first time on his own merit, without his father's shadow doing the negotiating for him. Diane used her share to launch a foundation in her mother and father's names, funding emergency roadside assistance programs across 3 states, a decision that, she later admitted, only made sense to her after meeting Elena. Tyler did something no one expected. He asked Elena quietly, almost sheepishly, if he could meet her son. He'd spent his whole life being the family's disappointment, chasing money that was never truly his. Something about a woman who gave away millions because it felt right cracked something open in him that no lecture from his father ever had. He got a real job 8 months later, his first at 33 years old. Elena kept working at the gas station for another 4 months after the settlement, not because she needed to, but because she said she wasn't ready to become a different person overnight. She eventually left to open a small roadside diner, the kind of place, she said, where if your car breaks down at 2 a.m. in a snowstorm, somebody inside will still come out to help you. She named it Grace's. Richard Callahan didn't leave his fortune to a stranger to punish his children. He left it to remind them, and all of us, that inheritance isn't just about what gets handed down when we die. It's about what kind of person we become while we're still here. A stranger pulled him from a burning truck one snowy night and asked for nothing in return. 34 years later, he made sure that same spirit, passed down through a daughter who never even knew the story, was given a chance to change 3 more lives. Sometimes the greatest inheritance isn't money at all. It's the chance to become someone worth leaving something to. If this story moved you, let us know in the comments which part hit you hardest, and don't forget to subscribe because next week's story might just be the one that stays with you the longest.